Good evening, everyone. Happy Women's History Month, and as obviously graduates and alum of a women's college, it's an important month for us. I'm Jean Fox. I'm class of 75 and have the honor of being the president of the AADC. On behalf of our board and our staff, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 2024 Zagoren Lecture. The lecture was inaugurated in 2004, and it's presented in honor of the late Adelaide Marcus Zagoren, class of 40. She was a role model for many of us. I'm sorry that the younger classes don't know her, but really a wonderful woman who we learned a lot from. Adelaide was a woman who left her mark on history and was quite a role model for many of us who are graduates of Douglas. She was a woman who left her mark, not just in the AADC, but throughout New Jersey. She was first an administrator of 3 large nonprofits organizations. First one, Raritan Valley Girl Scout Council, followed by the United Way of Greater Middlesex County. And then for 26 wonderful years, she was the executive director of the Associate Alumnae at Douglas College. She was our strong leader. Additionally, she served as a trustee and president of the Blanche and Irvin Laurie Foundation, a philanthropic organization. It's our honor to celebrate her legacy every year by inviting other history-making alumna to share their work with our community. The legacy of Adelaide and the Zagoren Lecture continues today through her daughter, Laura Zagoren Baron, who's with us today. Hey, Laura, class of 70. We're happy to have Laura with us this evening. She's been a leader in her class, as well as a consistent donor and an advocate for the AADC. We're so grateful to her for her leadership as an alum and as a benefactor for this event, and as president of a valuable partner and serving a trustee of the Blanche and Irving Laurie Foundation, which I note was the fantastic benefactor for our 2023 Women's Conference, which just was out of this world. So Laura, thank you for continuing your mother's legacy and granting us this yearly opportunity to bring our alumni together. This year, we're thrilled to have Whitney Pennington Rodgers, class of 2007, as a Zagoren lecturer. Thank you, Whitney, for being with us today and sharing how we can rise above the noise, and there's a lot of noise out there. A formal introduction will be coming soon. Events like tonight is at the heart of the AADC mission. Throughout the year, we have programs and lifelong learning opportunities that represent the interests and the needs of our diverse alumni, near and far. Please check our website, douglasalumnae.org, for more information about upcoming events. I want to note, though, you should try to plan to be with us at our AADC reunion weekend this June. It's June 7th and 8th, obviously at the Douglas campus. We'll be celebrating the Vanguard class of 1974, which is what I started with back in 1970, but also all milestone classes ending in 4 and 9. Remember, reunion is open to all of us, all alumni. So even if it's not your milestone reunion year, you're very welcome to come back to campus to have fun, a memorable weekend, and go to all the programs that are offered to us. At this time, I would like to pass the program over to Lee Brodsky-Schubert, class of 2004, who is the chair of the AADC Lecture Committee. Lee?
Thank you, Jean. I too want to take a moment to thank Laura for helping make tonight possible, and also a huge thank you to the AADC Lectures Committee members for sharing their time to help research and select tonight's speaker. Thank you all. If you're interested in joining the committee or have suggestions for future speakers, please email the committee staff liaison, except Martinez. It is thanks to volunteers like you that the AADC has a proud history and a bright future. With your continued involvement as volunteers, leaders, and indeed as agents of change and growth, the AADC is poised to be a powerhouse for women, supporting women for the next 100 years. And now for the moment we've all been waiting for. Please mute your microphones as we transition to the formal lecture. We encourage attendees to engage in the chat rooms and to ask questions. You can submit questions about the lecture using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and Whitney and I will keep track of them for the Q&A section at the end of the lecture. Alumni and friends will also have the opportunity to turn on their microphones at the end of the lecture and ask questions as well. Now it is my pleasure and honor to introduce Whitney Pennington Rodgers, class of 2007. Whitney Pennington Rodgers, class of 2007, is an award-winning journalist and the current affairs curator at TED, where she curates and interviews speakers to address the most urgent topics of the moment. Prior to joining TED, Whitney was a video journalist at NBC News, where she produced for NBC's primetime news magazines Dateline NBC and Sunday Night. Whitney earned a DuPont Columbia Award and a News and Documentary Emmy for her contributions to the Dateline NBC hour, The Cosby Accusers Speak, an extensive group interview with 27 of the women who accused the entertainer Bill Cosby of sexual misconduct. Whitney has worked in NBC's in-house production company, Peacock Productions, The Today Show, Nightly News, Rock Center, and New Jersey-centric public affairs show, Caucus, New Jersey, and One-on-One with Steve Adubato. Prior to beginning her career in media, she had a short stint as a fourth grade teacher through the Teach for America program. Whitney received her Bachelor's of Arts in Journalism and Media Studies from Rutgers University. She completed her Master's of Journalism at the University of California at Berkeley, where she produced a documentary about recruitment of non-Black students at historically Black colleges and universities. Please welcome Whitney, our 2024 Zagoren Lecturer.
Thank you so much, Lee. I want to start by thanking the AADC for inviting me to be this year's Zagoren Lecturer, and Laura Zagoren Baron, daughter of the late AADC president, Adelaide Zagoren, and the benefactor of this program. As a student, events like this were so meaningful to me. I attended countless talks and lectures and fireside chats. I honestly devoured them. Hearing from people I admired, whose work and careers inspired me, was perhaps more influential than any of the things I learned sitting in a lecture hall or a classroom. And so I am so deeply honored and humbled to be doing this tonight. And I think the fact that this particular event is open to the public says so much about the value the AADC puts on education, not just for students, but as a public service. I feel so lucky to call myself a Douglas alum and to be part of this incredible network. So as I've been preparing today's lecture, I've been thinking a lot about my own time at Douglas and the impact my experiences there have had, not just on my career, but my life. I walked onto that campus when I was just 17 years old and had hardly a clue about who I was or who I wanted to be. I studied journalism and planted seeds for what so far has been a very rich and fulfilling career. I minored in women's and gender studies and learned about the hard-won victories and devastating losses our sisters have experienced on this road to equality, an education that continues to inform so much of the work that I do today. I made lifelong friends, including my husband, the father of my two children, who I met there nearly 20 years ago. So many parts of my life that I love most wouldn't exist were it not for Douglas. And one spark that ignited during my time as a student, and in fact is the basis for today's talk, is a fascination with media and its effect on all of us. Now, my parents would say that spark was ignited far earlier. They often would share how I would sit and watch the 5 o'clock news as a toddler. Our local news program was called The Action News, and it wasn't just the zippy intro music, but I seemed to actually be engrossed by the program itself and would sit there watching for the full 30 minutes. Now, all these years later, I couldn't tell you if I was actually watching these news stories, but it definitely tracks with the direction my life has taken. Through my journalism studies, I fell in love with nonfiction storytelling in all its forms: documentaries, radio programs, long-form magazine pieces. I loved how these stories offered these tiny windows into the lives and experiences of real people. And I soon realized that these stories weren't just informing us, they were us. Media was a reflection of our world and ourselves. It told us what mattered, what we should care about, what we should like, what we should love. It told us who we are. And for this reason, I've long believed that journalism is the most important work there is. Because while the media might not save lives, it certainly shapes them. So in recent years, I've been deeply concerned by what media and journalism has become, what I know all of you have watched it become. You turn on the TV and you can't avoid the shouting and mudslinging. You look at the news and are greeted by wild headlines that paint our world as a dystopian nightmare or a deranged circus, depending on the source. And that's the thing, really. There are so many sources saying so many things. It's really impossible to keep track of it all or make sense of it all. It's all become so noisy. But it doesn't have to be. And I think there are things that all of us can do to sift through the chaos and get to the information that really matters. But before we talk about that, let's talk about the noise itself and break down what I mean when I talk about the challenges we face in this moment in media. I won't get into the history of what's brought us here. I mean, that's another lecture entirely. But I do think it's important to stress that this moment is so unlike any other that we've experienced in modern media. And that's, of course, because of this and all of this. Media has become so integrated into every part of our lives thanks to the internet, social media, and smartphones. These technologies have enabled us to work smarter, connect more easily, and be better at so many things while simultaneously wreaking potentially irreparable havoc on all of our lives. Now, that's one hell of a dichotomy, and one that we continually struggle to reckon with as these technologies and the ways in which we engage with them continue to evolve. Hello, AI. But today, I think we can see what's contributing to the noise we're all experiencing in this moment. So first is clickbait. Today's media landscape is an attention economy. At any given moment, there are a million things we could be watching or reading or listening to. Media creators, of course, know this, and they work really hard to make sure we always choose them. And one of the biggest ways they do this is to literally troll us with attention-grabbing headlines and captions and images that speak to our basic hopes, desires, and fears. We click again and again and again because we think their content is going to solve some big problem for us or answer some burning question. And when we click, we're sending a message that we like this content, and so creators make more of it. And we click again, and then other content creators make content because it's an attention economy, right? And we click that too, and we share this content with our friends, and they share it with their friends who also click it, and before you know it, we have an echo chamber. The idea of an echo chamber has become really popular in the last decade. They are these virtual spaces, town squares, if you will, where like-minded individuals gather and reinforce a specific line of thinking or an opinion again and again. Algorithms are continually showing us the information we like, thus creating an echo chamber that is really difficult to leave. These spaces are super polarized. What's said in your echo chamber rules supreme, and all other opinions are inferior. Inside our echo chambers, trusted sources can share ideas without much need for vetting. We begin to regard certain voices and platforms almost as gods of information. This makes us incredibly susceptible to any misinformation that might be shared. And in fact, these are the perfect conditions for misinformation to thrive. So all of this creates a noisy media landscape overflowing with content where it's hard to discern what's real, what's actually important, and who we can trust. So what can we do? Well, first and foremost, I think all of us should become more media literate. Media literacy is, by definition, the ability to critically analyze stories presented in the mass media and to determine their accuracy or credibility. Now, people throw this term around, but there is real pedagogy behind this that is truly foundational to a healthy media engagement. Now, I first learned about media literacy as a student here. During my time at Douglas, I was fortunate to be a leadership scholar at the Institute for Women's Leadership, a relationship that endures to this day as I now serve as a member of their advisory board. And as a leadership scholar, I developed a capstone project where I taught media literacy to high school girls to help them decode negative messages being presented to them in the media. To me, teenagers seemed like a prime audience for this kind of information. For the first time, many of them were engaging with media on their own and perhaps didn't have a great handle on what they were seeing or why. But the reality is that so few of us are truly media literate, and all of us engage with media all the time. Now, there are a lot of instructional resources for media literacy, but I am especially fond of the resource guide produced by the Ontario Ministry of Education. And I want to share their 5 principles of media literacy as a jumping off point. The first principle is that all media are constructions. Now, this is far and away the most important principle and is simply an acknowledgement that every single piece of content you come in contact with, from the TV shows you watch, to the news articles you read, to the social media posts you like, were created by someone, a person or a group of people. No media exists on its own. And of course, we all know this. I know we do. But How often do you actively consider this when you engage with the media? This principle implores us to stop and say to ourselves, someone made this. The second principle is that media construct reality. Now, as I noted earlier, the media offers us a glimpse into the experiences of the people around us, both real and imagined, and the sum of those experiences become our reality. Often, what we know about all of the things beyond our own lived experiences has been created by the media. Quite literally, the world is what the media tells us it is. Now, the third principle is that audiences negotiate meaning in media. This principle considers the role we all play in taking what the media shows us to construct our understanding of the world. We all have different lived experiences, and how I interpret something may be vastly different from what someone else might take away from the same exact thing. For instance, a headline about a rise in car robberies will mean one thing to someone who's been a victim of a car robbery than it will to someone who has never experienced one in their life. For one person, the headline might be fear-inducing and lead them to make immediate changes to the way they live their life, while for the other, it's just an interesting thing to know. Now, this makes media's impact on each of us as individuals really complicated and nuanced, and I think offers the best argument for why being media literate really matters. Content creators can't know how every person will interpret their media, so it's up to each of us to have the tools to uncover what the media is trying to say and what this means for us on a personal level. Now, the last two principles cover some similar ground. The fourth principle is that media have commercial implications. And the fifth is that media contain ideological and value messages. Both speak to why content creators make media. With media have commercial implications, we recognize that at the end of the day, people create media to make money. We implicitly understand this with advertisements, but a lot of the media we consume on a day-to-day basis is created by someone who's being paid to make it. Journalists, filmmakers, even social media influencers, especially social media influencers. Content creators want you to click on their content because clicks equals dollars. So to the point I made earlier about clickbait, there is real incentive for media creators to get you to engage with their media. And that incentive isn't just monetary. The final principle, media contain ideological and value messages, expresses how, like all of us, the people who create media have their own lived experiences, have their own perspectives, and those perspectives get baked into the content they create. Sometimes it's explicitly and sometimes without the creator even realizing it, but either way, when media is presented to us, the content creator is trying to persuade us to accept the viewpoint they are sharing. And this could be something as abstract as like affirming the proper role of women in society, or as explicit as convincing us to vote for one political candidate. Whatever the message, enforcing this viewpoint often benefits the creator in some way. A social media influencer might try to convince us of their wealth, and this maintains their role as an aspirational figure in our minds and keeps us following their content. With both of these principles, we learn there is often an ulterior motive in content creation, and media literacy is what helps us identify what exactly that might be. Now, once you become aware of the structure of media, that all media messages are created by someone with the specific intention to sell or persuade us of something, that these messages shape the way we think, the way we feel, act, and ultimately define who we are, you must never let yourself forget these media literacy principles. Let it inform every engagement you have with media. When you read a headline that triggers you, remind yourself that someone wrote this headline with the intention of capturing your attention. What is the story really about? Are things as dire or urgent as you're led to believe? When you see a social media post, remind yourself that someone created this post to persuade you of something. How does it make you feel when you read or see the post? How does that align with what they might want you to take away from that post? Are you being manipulated? Initially, you may need to consciously and deliberately pause when engaging with media messages so you can ask yourself these questions. But eventually, you will approach all media with a healthy dose of skepticism and curiosity. And without even realizing it, you'll begin to ask yourself, what is being communicated to me? Why? And here's what's key. What am I missing? Now, what am I missing is a question so few of us are actually asking ourselves when we engage with media. And in this climate, if you're not asking yourself this question, the answer is a lot. you're missing a lot. We all experience noise in media, but the noise you experience is unique to you. You are seeing specific ads and headlines and social content because of who you are, where you live, how you vote, who your friends are, and what you do in your free time. Now, some of this has to do with things within your control. For instance, the media sources you choose to follow, the influencers you choose to follow. And some of this happens without any active input from you at all. It's simply an algorithm showing you the things it thinks you like. Now, everyone's media diet is different, and what some people are consuming might be on completely opposite ends of the spectrum to what you consume. So this means that although you are inhabiting the same planet, maybe the same country, same state, same neighborhood even, their reality and your reality are two entirely different things. They might live in an area where wildfires are common, and news about wildfires and their impact is always front and center for them. In their world, wildfires are really important, and to them, it might seem like it's important to everyone because their noise is tailored to amplify content like this. When there are reports about successful wildfire mitigation techniques, this is big, exciting news for them. And on the other hand, if they learn that conditions of wildfire creation are worsening, the world might feel really dark and really heavy. Isn't it for everyone, they might think? Aren't we all seeing this? No. There are entire worlds outside of your bubble where people are consumed by real things, true things, that you are not experiencing at all. There are so many realities that are completely invisible to each of us. So when we paint our picture of the world, those other realities are not a factor. I mean, how could they be if you don't know they exist? So one big way to combat the noise in media is to simply seek out what's missing from your diet. Now, this might sound really hard on the surface. How can I seek out something if I don't know it's there? But the truth is you do. Of course, we know that for every point, there is at least one counterpoint. When the voices in your echo chamber start to align around one perspective again and again and again, this is your alarm to seek out another perspective. If it seems like everyone is saying, Oppenheimer was amazing, you can start just by Googling, Oppenheimer was a terrible movie, and see what you find. You'll be greeted by a trove of articles, videos, and social posts presenting alternative perspectives. Now try not to judge these perspectives. Going into this exercise expecting to discover the crazy people who don't agree with you will only hurt your efforts to learn. Instead, engage curiously. Ask yourself, what has influenced their perspective? What part of their experience can you relate to? Is there something they've said that you actually agree with? And even if you aren't persuaded to completely change your opinion, you likely will hear or read something that at least makes you think critically about your own stance and look at the people who hold that opposing viewpoint differently. As you're engaging with different perspectives, start to make note of the sources of these viewpoints. If there are articles that are smartly written, subscribe to that news source. If there are voices you find compelling, follow them. Similarly, if there are sources you already follow that seem to perpetuate the noise, that never present a diverse perspective, that say the same things over and over again, unfollow them. Like, just unsubscribe. I stopped watching cable news years ago for this exact reason. Slowly, you will expand the kind of information you are hearing and seeing. Your media diet won't just be comprised of opinions like your own, and the noise will start to dissipate. Now, up to this point, I've shared how we can be smarter consumers of information, how we can better receive ideas others are creating to minimize the noise in our own lives. But of course, this is only half the battle. Truly disrupting the way we communicate ideas means that we're not just being smarter about what we consume, but we're more thoughtful about the messages we create as well. Now, some of you may be tuning out at this point thinking, well, this part is for journalists and other content creators. I'm strictly consuming media over here. Well, no, all of us, every single one of us create media, and many of us are doing it without even realizing that that's what's happening. So first, if it is your job to create media, you are a journalist or a filmmaker or some kind of influencer, it's easier to see how you can use what I've shared here to inform your own content creation. Recognize your bias. How are your own experiences influencing what you're saying? How is your perspective limited by these experiences? Consider alternative perspectives. What other viewpoints can you address and reflect in your own content? Acknowledge how your content is positioned within the platform you are using to communicate. Are you a journalist who is writing yet another article that is saying the same thing on a topic as every other journalist who came before you? How will your content actually advance the conversation? And finally, be thoughtful about your audience. Who is consuming your content? Why? What might your message mean to them? How can you frame your message to be accessible to a wider audience? And as for the rest of us, well, thanks to social media, we're sharing information with every post we make and link we share. And even in the good old-fashioned face-to-face conversations we have, we're communicating ideas constantly. Within your circle, you are an influencer. What you say and think absolutely impacts the way people in your network feel about specific issues, the world, and even themselves. So imagine there's a bit of misinformation going around. You stumble across this info written by a source you trust or a platform you trust and shared by other voices you trust. So you like it and you share it on your social channels too. The idea explodes and spawns other bits of content, and before you know it, you start to see it everywhere. In this scenario, you're just one person, but when it comes to your network, you've contributed to the noise in a very big way. Someone who trusts you sees that you've shared this content and they share it, and then someone who trusts them shares it, and on and on. All of this sharing leads to clicks and views, which we know now tells the original content creator and your algorithms more of this. So what you read and share and like matters, not just for what information you see, but what everyone in your extended network, friends of friends of friends, see. Your voice and activity in these spaces has so much power, I bet more than you realize. All of us, right here in our fingertips, are so powerful. It may feel like you are just one drop in a giant stream of information, but when that drop flows in the direction of a collective, the ripple can be enormous. So post and share ideas thoughtfully and carefully. Rising above the noise is completely possible. So just to summarize, be media literate. Think about the principles of media literacy when you see content online. Who created what you're seeing? Why? Engage outside your bubble. Acknowledge that there are realities beyond the one right in front of you. Seek out perspectives and ideas outside of the bubble you have constructed and the one that has been constructed for you. Be thoughtful in your own media creation. Think twice before you share a piece of content. Know that the ideas you put out into the world or the ones you amplify is a power you possess, and you must wield that power cautiously. Now, what I've suggested is not easy. Our engagement with media has become so second nature that thinking about the intent behind the content we consume is real work. And for most of us, it probably feels like work you don't have time for. I mean, I get this. I have 2 kids under the age of 4, and there is never enough time for anything. But think about what happens if we don't do this. If we don't take the time to be smart about our media engagement, we allow our world to be crafted by somebody else. Someone else decides what's important. Someone else decides what matters. Someone else dictates the worries and the concerns that get to take up space in our minds completely rent-free. I believe many of the biggest challenges we face as individuals and as a society are precisely because we aren't taking the time to be smart about our media engagement. People share ideas mindlessly. One person stands up and says something is scary or wrong, and everyone follows suit, too wrapped up in the noise to push back or question the reality being presented to us. When that is the world we live in, it's easy for us to be divided on political issues. Everyone says this is bad, so it must be true, right? Or to think war, hardship, and conflict won't affect us because I didn't see that in my newsfeed. Or to not think about the literal destruction of our planet and how we can make smarter, more sustainable choices because something glitzier, shinier, and louder is constantly being shoved in our faces. In my work, I spend a lot of time encouraging people to be open-minded and engage with ideas that might challenge or scare them. There is simply no time where this matters more. The world is evolving so quickly, quicker than it ever has, and we are at the precipice of even faster humanity-altering change happening. Generations from now, our descendants might look back at this moment as the pivotal point in our history where we decided whether we as a species will perish or thrive. It's our choices today that count. Let's tune out the distractions, figure out what really matters, and focus our attention there. We have everything we need to silence the noise around us. Let's do it together before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Whitney. There are a couple questions. Oh, okay. There are a couple questions in the chat, but because I'm also doing the Q&A, I want to ask my question. So, first of all, I'm a high school teacher. I have 9th graders, I have 11th graders. So this is all well and good for us as adults. How do we encourage students, people who are emerging themselves as readers, as content creators, as people who are engaging in media? How do we encourage them to seek out those sources? And my other question is, with perspectives on such extremes, how do we do that? How do we look at the other side in a safe way? Because for some people, looking at that other side, there's real danger in engaging with that media, both in terms of mental health, but also in terms of personal safety.
Yeah, I mean, these are great questions. And I feel like young people are growing up in such a different space, and their ability to sort of navigate this world, I think is so different from all of us. And I say that I'm a millennial, and I'm speaking about Gen Z, and I guess they're calling Generation Alpha now. They really little.
Yeah, they're alpha.
They're alpha. Yeah, the alphas and Gen Z, I feel like are growing up in a space where this is literally second nature to them. The way in which media is shared with them, the idea that someone creates content, they're living in a world, they're living online essentially, and not having to learn another language. And I think that the conversations for them, in some ways, I feel like it's easier for them to access different opinions because they're not that I think that they're less susceptible to bubbles and echo chambers, but I feel like it is they're more open to differing perspectives. And I think that that's sort of an interesting thing to say, like, because I think a lot of us think, oh, well, I am open to other points of view, but I'm always stunned by when I have the conversations that I do with young people. In fact, last year I curated a talk from a high school student who spoke, in fact, a lot about talking to people who disagree with her, and just was really stunned by how she was saying that she felt like, this is less of a concern for her peers than it is for older people who she speaks to, that she finds that there is, more of an interest in understanding other opinions, even if you don't agree with them. But I also think that a lot of it, just as with a lot of things, is mirroring. If you're with young people, whether you're a teacher or a parent to younger people, listening to that other content in front of them, to help them understand that there are other perspectives or viewpoints, and using it as an opportunity to have conversation. And then to your second question about the danger in some of that there are some spaces that really are scary, and voices that are saying things that you don't want to listen to, let alone expose to children, right? I think a lot of that is thinking smartly about those sources before you do that. I think all of us need to sort of wade into this space very, very cautiously and protect yourself, protect your own sanity and protect your own well-being. If reading certain headlines, are going to trigger you in some way, I think it might be meaningful to start with opinions that feel a little bit less on the other end of the spectrum. I think there's so much attention put on the extremes and not enough on left of center, left of right of center. And I think that space is where you're going to find things that feel more palatable and easier to engage with.
So kind of going off of that, there are two questions in the Q&A. One is, can you share your favorite and most trusted sources of information? And along with that, and kind of to your point, what are some tips on maintaining privacy while staying engaged on social media?
Yeah, so I guess to the first point, like, so I mentioned I don't watch cable news. I subscribe to a lot of newsletters, and a lot of them are authors and thought leaders who are just sharing their own opinions. And I often use those as sort of opportunities to hear different perspectives on issues and expose myself to different news stories through some of those perspectives. One space, and this is not a news source, but is a way that I find a lot of voices, is the Manhattan Institute, which is actually it is a conservative, or I guess I don't know that they would consider themselves conservative, but they're definitely more right-leaning of an organization, highlighting voices on a lot of issues that are of interest to me. I think that I found a lot of people in that space who are saying things that I don't necessarily agree with, but are saying things in a way that I'm like, well, I can see why you think this, or I can see the value in this perspective. And it's not so much of the sort of thing you might find on a place like Fox News, not to bash Fox News, but where it does feel like it's just too inflammatory for you to truly engage with it in some way, or other platforms like that.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so that's more right of center, but still saying things that are smart, that are sourced, that are not inflammatory, but of a perspective, not of clickbait.
Right. Yes. And I think that you may find, I think this is a good way to sort of put your toe in the water if this is something you've never tried to do. And you may find that there are certain issues that you really are interested in going a little even further and deeper into it, and maybe find that you really are finding a perspective that isn't represented in the platforms you normally follow. And you may be able to find other sources that are teaching you something new or showing you something you've never considered. And you had another question about,
yes,
say it again.
Yeah, the other question was maintaining your privacy while staying engaged and involved in social media.
This is tough, and I'll be honest, I struggle with how you do that. If you're sharing posts publicly, I think you open yourself up to the public, and so I think if privacy is a concern for you, there is always the opportunity to make your profile private. If you're concerned about people you don't know responding to things that you might say that you feel like could be the basis for some sort of argument, or could create some sort of strife in your own life, I think that that is always an option. I personally, my profiles are private for this reason. I think I share content that's not even inflammatory, but just things about myself that I think I wouldn't necessarily want people to know, especially if they've heard me say things that they maybe don't agree with. And so I feel like that is always an option that I think more of us could choose if that's a concern. And I want, it's something I grapple with, because I do also wonder if it starts to begin to feel as if you're hiding yourself from the public by doing this. And I think that at the end of the day, it's just coming down to what you personally feel is the best in terms of protection for yourself.
And also what you have the bandwidth for, when you invite yourself into those public spaces, do you have the time to engage in a public way versus something that's more personal, private? You can use more shorthand. Also related to that, there's another question especially because you have young children. I have a almost 11-year-old. So how can we be honest with kids about what they see, but still protecting who they are, their innocence? How do we engage with media, not as an individual adult, but as a leader of a family?
No, I mean, I think this is a tough question to answer, especially as we're entering an election year, and we can already anticipate some of the things. In fact, we're already starting to see that it's going to be similar to the last election in terms of seeing things that you don't necessarily want your children to see, or conversations that are really challenging to have. I mean, I think that there is, to the extent that you can, I think it's meaningful to sort of look at content yourself before opening your children up to it, at least knowing that, okay, this is, we're going to listen to a podcast in the car, and I've listened to an episode of it before, and I feel comfortable with the voice that this person has and the way that they speak and the types of guests that they invite on, and the way they think about issues. I think that that's also really helpful to be able to do that. And I honestly, I feel like, and my kids are very little, so I haven't had I'm not at the point yet where we're just starting to have questions about some of the things we see and hear out there in the world. But I think that there's an element too of having to have some of these tough conversations and find the language to do that. And I say this as someone who I don't know what that language is yet, but I know that this world, it's not going away. The polarization and some of the challenges that we're facing, they're not disappearing. So completely shielding our children from it feels like it's doing them a disservice and learning how they can navigate those waters.
Yeah. And looking at, resources that are more geared for families and how do we talk about some of these issues in a age appropriate and cognitively appropriate way. Along with cognitive, how do you see artificial intelligence impacting all of the issues that you spoke about? Because there's media literacy, and then there's how do we tell if this is a deep fake or not? So that totally shifts our landscape too. So
yeah, it is wild. I like the artificial intelligence, a lot of our content has been focused in this space. We have a conference at TED coming up in the next few weeks, and we have a lot of speakers who will be addressing AI in some way. And we realize that even as the talks that we're preparing, they may become stale, by the time they give them, soon after they are posted online. And, sort of thinking about how we can continue to have that conversation in a way that feels fresh. It's tough. Like that's a space that's constantly evolving, and AI is changing everything. I mean, down to when you think about you look at right now, right, we're having this conversation, and I trust that you are Lee and you trust that I am Whitney, but that all changes with AI, right? Like all of that becomes
right.
so different. So it is a wild west. I think that I don't have a good answer for this one. Like I think we're all sort of figuring this out as we go. It just adds another layer of when you ask yourself what is being presented to you, you now have to ask yourself, is this a real person? And then the next question that comes from that is, does it matter? If the person is not real, does it actually matter that that a non-human created an idea and presented it to you? Does it make it less compelling? Does it make it less true? These are questions that I think none of us really have the answer to yet, and are still figuring that out, or we all have different answers to it.
Yeah. So somebody else is asking, do you think that one day all people will get their news exclusively from social media rather than news networks, thereby causing people to become more closed off in their focus rather than global? Because we know, everything runs on these algorithms, but specifically social media, and obviously the conversations about TikTok and what we're seeing on Instagram. So what do you think about that?
I think it already is happening. There already are people who exclusively get their news and their information from social media. And I think that that's the reason why news organizations and organizations we trust to share information have focused so much attention on their presence on these platforms. And so, it isn't invalid to learn about something on Instagram because the AP has an Instagram account. Maybe you follow them and they've shared that there, or, on Twitter or X, the same sort of thing. The question I think there, of course, becomes around these algorithms, the way that in which information is being shared, and that that's always a big question. for all of us and all the way up to Congress, thinking about how we can regulate that better. And it feels like something that I think it's less about running away from that and leaning into it. And I think the news sources that are being really smart about how they can create content in a way that is engaging in these social spaces, and recognizing that people, as we have more access to information, and are diving deeper into these virtual spaces, that turning your back on sort of the traditional forms of media is the smartest thing to do, I think, and appreciating that we're navigating new waters, and this is the future.
Okay. So a couple of TED questions. So what are the best TED Talks that can be cold viewed, and what are some exciting new projects on the horizon for TED that you can share, if you can share?
Oh, so I never like to publicly share my favorite TED Talks because I love all of the TED Talks. And I think the nice thing about TED is that there's literally something for everyone. Like, I mean, that we really pride ourselves in being able to present content in a way that anyone can access, no matter what your background is or what discipline you work in. You can look at a talk about any obscure subject and should be able to take something from it, learn something new. And to the point of this idea of media diets, what I find really compelling and interesting is for me, right? And there are things that speak to your own experiences that you might find more interesting. And so I always encourage people, if you just go to TED.com, we change on a daily basis sort of the content that's featured at the top there. Those featured talks, I think they're always excellent, and we always suggest more talks like that if you see something you like. So spend some time on our homepage, and you'll find some really great things there. Which I know is a non-answer, so I'm sorry to sort of skirt that question. I just it's one I always try to get out of responding to. But to the question of more exciting things that are on the horizon. So I guess what I can say is that my role at TED is I'm the current affairs curator, and I started there to sort of bring news to an organization that is not a news organization, to help us think about more urgent topics. And so that's a space that we're constantly innovating in and trying to think about new ways we can present this kind of content and information. And so one such series is we have a series called TED Explains. And if you've followed it recently, they've been these conversations. We've had TED Explains the World with Ian Bremmer, and there are these conversations with political scientist Ian Bremmer about just big world issues. And these have been really great opportunities for us to look at things that are happening out in the world and sort of break them down in a way that feels very TED-like. And so we're looking to do more things like that and have more series with other types of experts on different subjects. And we don't have anything that we're preparing to release very soon, but it's something that we're thinking about.
Okay, yeah, and those sounds like, I mean, again, I know as a teacher, I have a whole lot of TED Talks bookmarked. And TED Ed is also great, quick video, hero's journey, go. But yeah, you can find anything on TED. So somebody else had questions more again on the professional side, and your personal growth trajectory. So how do you confront or wrestle with any kind of imposter syndrome, especially early on in your career? Do you utilize some of those strategies now? And with a topic like this, that's so big and just so encompassing, how do you motivate yourself when your efforts are sort of chipping away? Does it ever feel futile?
Yeah, I mean, I think imposter syndrome is a very real thing, and I actually think it's it's healthy. I think that it's healthy for you to do something that challenges you and for you to feel a little nervous about it, and to not be sure that you're doing enough, and it pushes you and motivates you to do more. I think that if in there is a healthy way to experience imposter syndrome. So, and there is also a very unhealthy way to experience it. But I think if you're using it to sort of motivate you and to constantly surround yourself by people who admire you, who you look up to and aspire to be like, to operate at their level, I think that it's a good thing for growth. And so I definitely experience imposter syndrome every single day. And I think that it's what drives me. And the second question, I'm sorry, will you say it again, Lee?
The second question is with, how do you motivate yourself when your efforts are only chipping away at a critical issue? Does it ever feel futile? And knowing that, in this kind of space, you can really hit burnout quickly too.
Yeah. I mean, progress is slow, right? I think when you see people working on a lot of issues that feel really big and insurmountable, I think it is really hard to sometimes wake up every day and feel like that helped move the needle a little bit. The work I do specifically of sort of amplifying voices of people who are doing interesting things is unique in that I find people and help them distill the work they're doing down into like the short story so that we can actually see the growth and the progress. And so there is this sort of satisfaction in being able to know that, oh, this person has been doing this incredible work for 10 years. And here's this 10-minute talk about how they've grown over these 10 years, and helps them to even see that they've accomplished more than they maybe even realized. And I think in thinking about sort of to the topic of this conversation, the idea of trying to encourage people to broaden their perspective, it's definitely tough. I mean, and I think we are often having conversations at TED about how we can do this in a way that is smart, that thinks about the dangers in amplifying certain voices. And we get it wrong sometimes, like I have personally experienced getting it wrong, and it doesn't feel good when that happens. But I also believe that getting it wrong means you tried. And so I feel like the sting of that, of putting in the effort, maybe not seeing yourself maybe take even a step back and not even so much as just a tiny step forward, at least it lets you know you're trying. And I think every day reminding yourself of that as you're feeling tired and you feel like you're coming up against a wall and that the progress does feel slow, it's those feelings, that exhaustion lets you know that you're trying and that effort is meaningful. And so that is what I constantly remind myself of, is to tap into the feeling of the effort you're doing, and know that that means that you are slowly pushing that boulder uphill, even if you maybe never see it reach the top of the mountain. You contributed in a meaningful way.
Another question we had: is there any current legislation we should keep our eyes on regarding media and other issues? I mean, obviously the TikTok ban is, talking about kind of curating news. That's kind of been all over, at least in some of the feeds that I follow.
I mean, and that's sort of been the big one that I've been paying attention to, is the TikTok ban, and thinking about what that means for the future of media and how we consume content, and not just in the United States, but the global implications of that, I think are huge, and also just beyond just media itself, sort of what that means for geopolitics. And there's so many different elements of that I think are really huge. So I would say that's really where my attention has been focused in this moment too.
In terms of, again, you said TED has topics for everyone. Are there ways or specific avenues for TED Talks by students, by more minority voices, or is that just all part of, from what I've experienced with TED, that's pretty much the TED brand. You can find literally anybody. And I know my school, we do actually, our kids run a TEDx program where they have a TED Talk live. So
awesome. I love that. Yes, so I guess what I'll say is for a long time we had an event called TED Women that launched over a decade ago. I think at this point it was like 12 or 13 years ago that they launched TED Women, specifically because we felt like there was an imbalance. And I say we, I wasn't at TED at the time, but they felt like there was an imbalance in the number of women who were on the main stage and giving talks, and the content was heavily leaning male. And since then, we now have more of our talks are delivered by women or people who don't identify as men. And to the point that we're rebranding TED Women to be TED Next, and sort of thinking about the future of everything, sort of just the next voice of thought leaders, the next voices in political leadership, the next voices in science and tech, and all of the spaces we like to cover. And yeah, we really do try to represent a diversity of voices. So if you're looking for talks by anyone from any specific region of the world or specific background, we probably have something from someone, and not just speaking to the things happening in that part of the world necessarily either, but just speaking on issues that consume their time, whether it is connected to their identity in some way or not.
Okay. So one other question, and this is kind of going back to social media, but how can standards of civility be established, promoted, expected in the media on platforms? And I think, again, that, we see the mudslinging and some of just the nastiness, and that's not new to social media. That's been, political ads for years, but how can we kind of establish that and maybe model that a little bit?
It's something that we think a lot about, and I think a lot about, because a lot of the content I create is sort of in this space. I host a lot of Zoom conversations over Zoom with speakers, and they're live, and we invite our members or people in the TED community to come and join these events, to submit questions as you're doing right now, and to talk to each other in the chat. You hope that people do maintain that level of civility. And I think, again, like modeling that feels like that's really where you begin, that if we approach these conversations from a place of curiosity, which is a big word we use a lot with our TED content, is that we're thinking about things curiously, that you're not necessarily looking to prove someone wrong or stump them on this one thing that they don't know, or trying to reveal the flaw in their thinking. That instead you're truly interested in, why might someone think this? Why might they have this perspective? Where might they be coming from? And this sort of recognition that all of us, whether you agree with someone's opinion on something or not, are trying to do our best in this life. And I truly believe that all of us want to be good. And what that means for each of us is different. And I think approaching people sort of with that recognition of their humanity and their desire to do the right thing, it puts you in a different space when you do try to have a difficult conversation with them. It's not about this horrible person in front of you, but just this person who thinks something that you don't think, and how can I understand why they might think that? And I think by showing someone that level of respect and kindness, even, it encourages them to respond in a similar way. It doesn't always happen, but it's I think the first step.
Yeah, definitely. I think goodness and humanity is something we should lead with, and just put more out there in the world. So I thank you so much. This was so enlightening. I took a whole page of notes. The questions that people were, I'm Jean's laughing. Seriously, like, I'm going in and talking about this with my juniors tomorrow. So I thank you so much on behalf of the Zagoren Lecture Committee and the AADC. This was really wonderful, enlightening, and I thank everybody on Zoom for joining us.